Hey guys. So as we just learned, I'm a person who does a lot of stuff. I paint things, I organize things, I get myself into weird situations. It's a thing. I've never really been like this, like for real. Everything I've ever done I've been super afraid of. So I spent 25 years doing nothing. I was afraid to join groups at school. I was afraid to learn an instrument. I was afraid to apply for scholarships. I was afraid to go to college. I was afraid of everything, so I didn't do anything. A few years ago, I had a baby. She's my second baby. I had her when I was 25. And I don't know if I was sleep deprived or crazy, but I decided that I needed to do something. So I started looking for what that was. I knew that I liked to make things, and I was a second-generation sign painter, eventually. So one day I went shopping for my stepdad, looking for a gift that would speak to a sign painter, and there was a book called Sign Painters. I say this word a lot. So in the book, I'm flipping through before I give it to my dad, whose job I'd never thought about. It was just familiar. The smells were familiar. The paint stains were familiar. But that was about it. So I'm looking through this book, and I see this woman. She has on a cowboy hat. She has tattoos. And I decide right there, this is the most badass woman I've ever seen, and I want to be like that when I grow up. So I start painting signs, and they're real bad. They're little Pinteresty signs, and they're more shabby than they are chic. I do that for a while. It's not great. Eventually, things start getting real. People start wanting my work. So I order fancy pants sign painter enamel. And I order fancy pants sign painting brushes. And they're not the same brushes that you get at Hoblob. They're these long things. You have to maneuver them. It's hard work. It's weird. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I was in it. And I ordered all this stuff, so I kept painting. Up until then, I hadn't had to take any risks. I had just sort of gone with the flow. And I've always been risk averse, so it didn't occur to me that was going to start happening. Eventually, I received an email one day. It was from an architect, and he said, "We need a sign painter. I have this project I'm working on. You want to meet about it?" So I met with him and his group, and I put on the best dress I could find, which wasn't really that great. And there was a festival going on in our city, so I had to park like a mile away from where we were meeting, and it was the end of August, so I rolled up to this meeting real sweaty and gross. And I sit down at a table, and they're just a bunch of white guys in suits, like, this is not my crowd. And I sit down, and they start telling me about their project, and they show me blueprints, as if I even know what a blueprint's about. And they're telling me about this thing that they haven't built yet. So they show me some branding, and it's very good. It's with a company that I've worked with. And then they ask, "Well, what do you envision for this building?" Well, I had no idea. I'd never seen the building. It didn't even exist. But I had to suck it up and whip out some idea on the spot. So I start talking about Instagrammable moments, how can we promote this through some real kitschy stuff, and it's a brick building, so it must have brick signage, and we can do some real cool stuff on metal. You guys, I'd never done any of this. I had never painted on brick. I didn't even know where to get metal or what I would do to it. I had no idea what I was doing in this meeting or how to write a proposal or do even a mock-up even. So I took this risk, and I don't even know that I knew how big of a risk it was. And they were interested. They wanted to work with me. So I had to figure it out. I wrote a contract. I made, proposals and a lot of mock-ups, like a lot, over and over. And eventually I got the job. And then I had to figure out how I was gonna do it. So I had to find where I was gonna buy the metal. I had to figure out how to paint a brick sign. I had never painted a brick sign. That's serious business. If you screw up brick, that's it. That's the worst. So I called my dad, had a little SOS moment, and I learned to paint a brick sign while we were painting my first brick sign. On a lift, super high in the air. I had to get down a few times to almost barf, but I didn't. That was a success. So we ended up with Thrive, and it was great, and I had my first brick experience. And that risk paid off. Because after that job, I got more, and I was legit. I went from being a hobbyist to a person with a real job. I never planned for that to happen. I was always afraid of that happening, because I could fail. Some of the risks that I've taken were huge in my head, but they really weren't that big of a deal. Like painting a sign for my good friends where I would have to climb up to the 3rd rung of a ladder. I was convinced I was gonna fall off and die. It's the biggest risk in the world that I had taken at that point. But it paid off because that friend who owned that brewery, they hollered at me to paint their 50-foot long sign on the side of their new building just last year. The tiny risks have turned into big opportunities. They've allowed me to paint their beautiful branding on one of the more prominent walls in our downtown. That's one that has meant so much to me. That tiny risk with that 3rd step on the ladder, it worked out. So my trajectory has been scary. It's been messy. I've had to figure out how I'm gonna do these things. And with every mess, and I mean spilling stuff on myself, spilling paint all over my car, freaking out on the spot, having to get pep talks from like everyone who knows me. It was a messy process, but really good things have come from it. So a big risk that I took just last year was taking these pep talks that I've needed and turning them into art that I wanted to share with others. This was a scary thing, you guys. It's scary to let people know the things that you don't want them to know. But I felt like I needed to. I'd had so many talks with other creatives that it seemed like making ourselves vulnerable is the best way to connect, so I started doing it. So I had, maybe an 18-inch by 2-foot piece. And then someone let me paint a big piece that went on their building. Share something beautiful. That's a good thing to say. Having a bad day, share something beautiful. But then, after that, someone let me paint a giant 400 square foot mural of a quilt pattern. And a quilt pattern meant something to me. It was the ultimate sign of comfort. So by taking these risks, I got to put out the thing that works for me into an environment that's allowed it to work for other people. That's a special thing. That woman, the one who got me interested in sign painting, she called me last year. She lives in Austin. We've hung out a couple times, and it's always been the most amazing. And she says, Olivia, I have a job here in Fayetteville. Is this something you'd want to tackle? It's 18 feet long, it's on brick, the building is still being built. So there's no way I'm gonna say no to that. I will pretty much do anything that she asks. So I go in with my long 18-foot paper pattern and all my little paint stuff in my cute kit, and I'm feeling really good about it. And the electrical hasn't been done in the building, so it's pretty dark. And I start to paint on the brick, and the grout in between, it's just falling apart. Every time I pick up my paintbrush, it looks like I've stuck it in the sand. So this was a risk that I didn't know was gonna be super risky, and it was rough. But I got through it, and I impressed the person that really meant the most to me. So I keep doing these small things because I'm terrified. I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy taking a risk. It's the worst feeling in the world. You get sweaty and you want to barf and you worry about things all day. What if I'm gonna fall off? What if everyone laughs at me and I look dumb? This is my process, but I have to suck it up, and I do. And every time I do, it leads to big things. So my process is not anything impressive. There's a lot of freaking out, and then it gets to the point where I have to just do the thing. So I do. Every day I try to identify what freaks me out and do the thing. Thank you.